kind of shifting gears a little bit, when you think about all these moving pieces and you're thinking about pricing and hiring and all the things that a business owner or even an entrepreneur or freelancer has to think about, how do you avoid feeling burnt out with that? And what does that look like? Because you can easily burn yourself out trying to scale or trying to maintain or sustain your business, especially if it's just one or two or three of you, and you're trying to keep the lights on, manage clients, scale, all the things, if you're working a 9 to 5 while also doing that. What did that look like for you all on your journey to scaling your businesses where you are, scaling your role to where you are, of managing the potentials of burnout?
So first and foremost, I won't say I don't believe in burnout. I believe that there are seasons. And I think if we start thinking of our business and our work-life balance, and I do air quotes for balance, in seasonalities, it helps us know, like, okay, my break is coming, if that makes any sense. So there might be seasons where you're working to 5 o'clock in the morning. There might be seasons where you're on a 3-week vacation, and whatever the case may be. But in that beginning stage, I really do feel like it's a season of grind. So in that stage of working towards retainer clients and so on and so forth, building the team, you have to, it sounds horrible to say, you either have it in you or you don't. And I understand the notion of, like, certain people, like, your life may not be set up for that. And that may mean that you scale a little slower. It doesn't mean it will not happen, but I don't think when you're first starting, you should be starting a business based off of, it needs to be as big as possible tomorrow. I think I talked to you about the fact that I initially started off with a partnership with a co-working space where they were opening up a podcast studio. I ran their podcast studio for free, and I got to see my clients there for free. I started this, and then next thing I know, I start working with 5 other co-working spaces to run their podcast studio. And then I started that in 2019 and 2021, I opened my first studio space. So my first studio space came from me not having any overhead and doing a bartering where these locations, they had this empty podcast studio, but they didn't have anybody to run it. And so sometimes it may look like being a little bit more creative in how you go about putting things together. And yes, did I want my own studio space out the door? 100%. But I have 5 studio spaces. Each of those studios are $30,000. I didn't have $30,000 for 5 studio spaces when I first started. And so it's understanding how to first develop what you're looking to do and do it slower so you don't burn out. And I think sometimes where I see people talking about they've burnt out in their business, it's because you're trying to do it all. Because what we see on social media is once people, I wasn't sharing on social that I was going from studio space to studio space. You didn't see those days. You then, all of a sudden, it looks like, oh, she now has this huge studio, she's working with this person. And so it's the reminder to yourself that if you're starting to feel burnt out, maybe you might need to take a moment and recalibrate what you're building. The other thing I'd say is I don't think enough people do partnerships. So in that partnership with the co-working spaces, initially it was an idea of, like, you guys have this podcast studio here, what are you doing with it? And they're like, we don't have anybody to run it and we can't pay anybody to run it. And so I think if we start thinking more about partnerships versus doing it on your own, and it's not saying that somebody has to have ownership in your work, because we scaled that into where anybody in the co-working space, it turned into a line item.